Hey guys, in this tutorial I want to cover the compound paths and shapes, get into a little bit of the Pathfinder palette, and how to create a clipping mask using Illustrator, which by the way, there's several different ways of doing it. We're going to cover them all, so let's get started. So I just have an 8.5 by 11 document just for demo purposes, and I'm going to draw a rectangle here on the top corner. And I'm going to go ahead and create an overlapping shape. This I'm going to choose the elliptical tool, give it a different color. So let's go with like an orangey color. That's fine. Doesn't matter the size. It's just for demo. So I'm going to select and I'm going to create 3 different copies of this. So instead of going to edit, copy, edit, paste, edit, copy, edit, paste, I hold down my Option Shift so that I can drag it on the same horizontal plane. So I create my copy. Now, check this out, guys. Here's a little keyboard shortcut. If I hit Command D as in David, it repeats my last step. And as many times as I hit Command D, 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 I can create and generate a pattern. So that's a little nifty little trick here you can use for other areas. So I'm just going to center that on my page. The first thing I want to talk about is called simple shapes, which is what you see here is just a rectangle and a circle. That is simple shapes. So I'm going to object and group these real quick because I want to talk about the group layer mode here. So even though they're group and you want to, let's say that I want to create any kind of edits, I don't want to continue to ungroup, then group again, make, ungroup, make my edits, then group it again. I can actually go into the group layer setting here, and here is and just click on the target object now that it's selected, and I can create my edits on the fly, or I can choose my elliptical here, and I can create secondary edits on the fly without having to ungroup them. A shortcut to this, however, if I double click on my grouped object, it takes me to the group editing mode. Now I can select either one of these on the fly and then make any kind of edits that way without having, again, to ungroup my object. So as you can see, it takes me to this isolation group editing mode. To get out of this, after I'm satisfied with whatever changes I decide to do to it, I can just click on the arrow back on one level, and I'm back to where I started. So this path here is known as simple paths, or it doesn't matter if they're overlapping or not. The next kind of paths that I want to talk about are called compound paths. Now, we went a little bit over with that sometime last week when you guys watched the pen tool tutorial. So what that is there's a couple of ways of creating it. I can use my Pathfinder palette, and I can select the minus front version of it. So that kind of created a compound path. I'm going to edit, undo that, or subtract. So, but what I really need to do is go to the Objects menu, Compound Path, Make. So it's like punching a hole right wherever the objects overlap. So now Illustrator perceives this as just one continuous shape. It's no longer 2 objects. So as you can see here, it's literally like punching a hole right through it. It creates my compound shape. No different than, I'm going to grab my type tool, type the letter R, for example. In typography, the inside part of the letter R, as you can see, is known as a compound path. No different than the way I created it here. Say overlap it again. So even though this is called a counter, but it is technically a compound path. Now I can take my compound path by going to my type menu, create outlines, and it's now, my letter R is now in vector shape. I can go to the Objects menu, Compound Path, Release, and now I have access to that shape and give it a different color and just play around with the typography that way. Or I can scale it down, distort it, change it around, and I can give it a different feel. Let me ungroup this. Actually, no, I can just go double click into my group editing mode, bring it back up, and just change the overall edits and edit my typography in that fashion. Now I can actually reapply the compound path by going to the Objects menu, Compound Path, Make, and give it a color. And now it's back to just one continuous shape. Illustrator, even though we can visually see 2 different shapes, once the compound path is applied, Illustrator will now see it as just one continuous shape. No different than the way I created it here. Another way to create a compound path is by using the Pathfinder palette. So let's go ahead and create a compound path release it so we can see. Now I have two different shapes, and I can actually take that one, give it a different color so you can see what I'm talking about here in my swatches. Okay. If I select these two objects, then hit my divide feature down on the bottom, what that does is it literally cuts my image out. And I hit the delete key, and I have my compound path. Grab my selection tool, no different, still creates a compound path. So I did it with the Pathfinder palette using the divide feature, and of course, traditional method using the objects menu. So I'm going to delete that. And I'll talk about a little bit more about creating outlines during the tutorials about using text in Illustrator, but not right now. So now the next type of shapes that I want to talk about is called compound shapes. Remember, not to be confused with compound path. This one, I'm going to create a compound shape. And again, I used the Pathfinder palette to generate that. So when I select both objects, I use my Unite feature, click on that. And now since my color orange was the top, since it's the last object that I drew, it will always be the topmost object. So therefore, it is the dominant color. So it changed my object to be orange. And now this is called, guys, a compound shape. Simple shapes, compound path, compound shape. And to view my results, I can go to View, Outline View Mode, and you can see Command Z before, Command Shift Z, which means redo. That is the process after I hit the Combine feature. Command Y brings me back to preview mode. Okay, so those are the three basic shapes. You got simple paths, compound path, compound shapes, which is a Unite feature. Okay, so let's get rid of that. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is clipping mask. And for this exercise, I downloaded a photo that I want you guys to use if you want to follow along. So I'm going to just go ahead and File, Place. And this photo is called flowers.jpg. So I'm going to hit Place. I'm going to just add it to my artboard. Doesn't have to be center. So a clipping mask, think about creating an object. The clipping mask has to be the topmost object. So it's the last thing that you drew will always be the masked object. So let's say if I draw, cancel. If I draw all these circles here, the last one that I drew, if I select all of these to create my clipping mask by going to Object, Clipping Mask, Make, that's going to be the dominant object. That's going to create my clipping mask. This is a clipping mask, guys. It literally just isolates the photograph to the shape of your path. So I'm going to edit, undo that. Okay. So let's say even if I have a star, doesn't matter what it is, I'll just use a star. Select both object, again, object, clipping mask, make. That is one way to create a mask. So if I want to edit this mask, I can go back into my clipping mask layer mode, or again, just double click on it. And I have access to the photograph. Maybe I can take the actual path itself, shrink it down, and maybe move the photograph, rotate it, however I see fit, to see whichever pattern I'm happiest with. Doesn't matter, you can just edit it as you see fit. I'm going to back out of that, and I'm out of my editing mode. So when I select the actual star, it doesn't select the overall photo like it has in older versions of Illustrator. And I have my bounding boxes. I can rotate my clipping mask. I can rotate that shape, scale it down, and so on and so forth, and create those kinds of edits. All right, guys, so that is one way of creating a clipping mask. So I'm going to Option copy this and release the mask. So I'm going to show you a different way of doing it. Hit release. Now notice that when I released it, any kind of fills or strokes that was associated with that path that you created for will now be disappeared. So if I deselect it, and if I don't see the path unless I mouse over it, or I can view it in outline view mode, I see that path. I can select it, remove it, delete it, Command Y brings you back. All right, so I'm going to straighten up that photo a little bit. So I'm going to show you another way of doing a clipping mask, okay? So you can also use typography to be part of your clipping mask. By grabbing my type tool, I'll just type the word flowers for say, enlarge it. Command T brings me my characters palette. See if I can bring much bolder text so you can see what's going on. Enlarge it. The cool part about this is now I don't have to create my text to outlines in order to apply a clipping mask. So I just select the typography, select the photograph, object, clipping mask, which by the way is Command 7. So from moving forward, I'm going to hit Command 7. And there is my masked object. Okay, so that's the second way of doing it. Now, another thing is it's still in edit mode, so I can add and edit it more, and it can still say, it still stays in a masked group. Okay, so I'm going to copy this over. I'm going to release the mask, which is Command Option 7. And notice that my typography stays the same because it wasn't created to outlines. And now I'm going to show you another trick on using clipping mask. All right, so let's say that I want to create some kind of either comic book cells or vertical blind effect to this. All right, so I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. Doesn't matter the color. And now I'm going to create, let's create some vertical blinds. Command Option creates my copy. Command D repeats my steps, and look at that, guys, I have vertical blinds. Now remember, only one object has to be the mask. So if I select all of this and I apply my mask, clipping mask, make, that's not the results that I want. I want the whole thing to be the mask. Edit, undo clipping mask. Now if I try to group them by going Object, Group, then select my photograph, then try to create my clipping mask, Illustrator is going to look at me and say, I don't know what you want. The results is not going to happen. Again, my solution is to convert these to a compound path. Make. Even though they're not overlapping, Illustrator now thinks that this is all one object. Hold down my Shift key, grab my selection tool, select everything, Command 7, and now it creates the effect that I want, which was these vertical blind effect. If you want more than one object to be associated with the mask, it must be converted to a compound path. Otherwise, it will not work because only one object can be the mask. All right. So I'm going to copy this over. I'm going to release the mask and get rid of all my other paths. So I'm going to show you. So that's 1, 2, 3 different ways to create a mask. So now I'm going to finally show you the final method. It's called draw inside. So let's say that I have this polygon here. I'm going to create, let me just give it a color so you can see what's going on. So there's a polygon there. So with this polygon here, I can select this method here that's called draw inside. So when I click on it, I get these little, that looks like registration marks. So I can take, I can really just take my like a paintbrush tool, get a different color, and no matter where I draw, once I release the mouse, it's going to draw inside those objects. Therefore, it's creating a clipping mask of the object that I already pre-selected and tell it to draw inside. It also uses with photographs. So I can take the photograph, but I have to copy it. Select the draw inside and hit Edit, Paste. And it pastes the photograph inside the object. So as you can see, I'm going to shrink it down. And now this is technically a clipping mask with the draw inside feature. So that's pretty cool. So I can even double click on it. Takes me back into the group editing mode. I can get rid of this brushstroke mess that I created, or I can just have it in this method and just have the actual photograph. So exit out of that. Guys, that's a clipping mask in a nutshell, how you do that in Illustrator. So let's just create a little exercise. I'm going to select all, delete. There's a photograph that I provided. I'm going to go ahead and hit place that. It's called T. So hit place. All right. So there we go. So I'm going to change my artboard to be in horizontal landscape. I'm going to enlarge this photograph by holding down my Shift key to cover most of this space here. Yeah, I kind of like the way this looks. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a clipping mask effect using this photograph. So I kind of like the polygons that I did. So I'm going to create an orange color polygon. And I'm going to draw some here outside the page, kind of like setting up the stage a little bit. That's a decent size. So I'm going to hold down my Option Shift key, and I'm going to copy that. I kind of like this distance, so I want to repeat my last step. Command D creates my pattern. How big do I want it? Okay, that's fine. So now I'm going to select them again. Command Shift, but this time it's going to go on a 45-degree angle. Actually, no, I want to freehand this, so I kind of like that pattern right there. Command D repeats my last step, and there's my pattern. So I'm kind of happy with that. So I'm going to zoom out. I want to position this on my page, maybe even rotate it. Let's see if I like that angle a little bit better. Bring some off the page, and I'm going to go to Object, Cut, create a new layer, and I'll call it Poly. Then I'm going to go to Edit, Paste in Front. What that does is it pastes it directly on top of where I cut it. And I'm going to take this background layer, or pick layer, I'm going to lock it down because I don't want to move it around. So now I'm just working on my polygons here. So let's say if I want to see how the polygons are overlapping, I want to just change the opacity, and maybe I'll just enlarge my polygons here a little bit more because I want more of that teacup showing, and maybe add a couple more to my pattern. Hold down my Shift key. Again, I'm just winging this on the fly, guys. That way you can see what's going on. Maybe I kind of like that one there. Maybe I want another one over here. There we go. There, that's kind of cool. All right, so now I can grab my selection tool, my magic wand tool, select all that color, and change the binding opacity back to 100%. Okay, now I only want to select certain few, not all of it. Only the ones that I want to be a part of my mask, not the whole thing though, because I still want some of this texture also. So I'm going to grab maybe all the ones that are surrounding my little teacup, and with my Shift key and click, I'm adding to my selection. There, there, and there. Those objects, I'm going to create a compound path because remember, only one object has to be the compound path. So now I go to Object, Compound Path, Make, and then select my background image, Object, Clipping Mask, Make. And this one looks a little off, so I can just go back in here and adjust as I see fit. Maybe a little larger, but you get the idea. Maybe get rid of these two after all. Okay, so only a few of those. Now I can probably go back into my photograph, grab a rectangle tool, and add a different color to it, and just start designing that way. But I can also just go into my color picker by going to Window. Where is my color picker? Color Guide. If I select this orange color here, I can choose complementary colors, compound colors, and I can start making edits in colors that complements my design, and just pick any random ones and just start changing the tints and the colors of some of these here as I see fit. And yeah, so I got about a couple different shades. Just make it some kind, just something that's visually interesting. I can even add text, and I'll call it tea time. Enlarge it, rotate it, maybe bring that photograph back in. So Command Shift P for place. Let's bring that photo back in here. Oh, I got the flowers, but that's okay. And I can just arrange, send to the back, and grab my T, Command 7, and there's my clipping mask. Okay. So that's it, guys. That's how you the different kinds of compound paths in Illustrator and clipping mask.